Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Switch Statement Podcast. It's a podcast for investigations into miscellaneous tech topics.
This is episode 6 in our series on the art of game design by Jesse Schell.
Hey, John, how are you doing?
Hey, Matt, I am doing well. How are you?
Doing pretty good.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. I'm trying to figure out. We keep on having this problem where we attempt to cover a couple of chapters, and there's just so much. It just expands. Each chapter expands to fill the space. So
yeah, we love talking more than I realized.
Right, and it's funny because we keep on saying the same things, and hopefully the listener is like, "What are you talking about? You have a very succinct and well put points."
I'm sure that's exactly what all of the listeners are saying.
Well, if that is what they think, it's because we have done a halfway decent job of editing out the 90% of like additional repetitiveness.
Yeah, we do try to remove cruft for the benefit of the ears of the citizens.
Yes. And the mind, the ears and the mind.
Indeed. So we are covering iteration today, right? That's the chapter we're talking.
Right. I think more like I love that he's just going into iteration itself.
Yeah, which is such an important concept. I mean, and I love this chapter because this is one of those concepts that's like near and dear to us.
Yes.
But we're in somewhat of an adjacent field. I would say software development shares a lot of similarities with design, and iteration is probably one of the strongest linkages. And I've always found iteration super duper interesting because I think it's very counterintuitive to human beings to like do something with this concept that you're kind of going to do it again. Like you're kind of going to do it like a little bit poorly or not necessarily poorly, but you know that you're not going to cover all your bases, and you just know that you're going to kind of revisit it and like continue to cover bases. And I think that's just so hard for someone to do unless they've kind of been in it for a while.
It's interesting because I think that there are a couple of different contexts where practitioners kind of learn this fact, though, where it's not exclusive to programming. There's a couple of different anecdotes that I have about iteration, which is like when I don't know Go, but I started to learn it, and I was talking to someone, and he was basically like, yeah, they say that the best way to learn Go is to lose your first 50 games as quickly as possible. You know, and
I thought you meant the programming language. You're talking about the board game where you place the like little discs and surround.
Important distinction. I'm talking about Go the game as opposed to Go the programming.
I was about to go off on this like Rob Pike and Andrew Garand tangent because I really like Andrew Garand, who is one of the creators of Go, and I was able to meet him one time at like this symposium, and it was a highlight of my life. But anyway, you're not talking about Go the language, so yeah.
No, I mean, we could, but no. This anecdote is about Go the board game. Excuse me. Anyway, it shares a lot of similarity because the point is like these initial games are really about kind of getting a feel for like the shape of the space.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's true too, where it's like, if you spend way too long making your first Go game perfect, you're not going to learn as much as if you kind of just go through and do several of these games.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think, chess is the same way, where there's just so many almost like micro elements that you need to learn. And there's just no way, no teacher is going to be able to say like, oh, here's element number 1 through 1000. And you're also just not going to internalize it like that. Right.
Yeah.
So Yeah.
The other anecdote that I have about this is there was an experiment, and I'll see if I can find a link to this. But they did an experiment with a pottery class. They split it into two groups. Stop me if I've said this story on the podcast before, but one group is just graded purely on the raw number of pieces they created, and then the other one was just graded on the quality of their best piece. So it didn't matter if they just made one amazing piece. They could spend all semester just working on one piece. And now, so
oh my God, I love this experiment.
This immediately gets at what you're saying, right? It's like clearly the people who could spend one whole semester on a single piece of pottery, like that had to be magnificent. But no, like the best piece of the pieces who made more were better than the pieces where they only had to make one really good piece.
That's amazing. And I am not surprised at all. Because, like anything creative, especially, which I believe that software engineering is like partially a creative pursuit. I think anything that's creative is going to be like that, where, you just really have to like do it and learn all these weird little, micro elements.
If any of the listeners are familiar at all with machine learning, all of these things are very high dimensional spaces where, pottery, right? There's a million different ways, different dimensions in which you could conceive of making a piece of pottery. And if you're only working on one piece, like there are kind of initial conditions that you're starting from. So you can only make these very small, explorations out of this like initial starting point. My envisioning is there's this process called gradient descent, which maybe this is getting a little too specific, but you're trying to solve a problem and you're trying to find like the minimum, or if you imagine maybe a 3D surface, you're trying to find the like lowest point on the 3D surface.
Right.
And the algorithm to find that is you try to take steps in different directions to find the where it's where it's heading downward.
Right. And you don't want to just find like a local minimum, right? Because
right. I mean that's also a hard problem because you can wind up in a local minimum. But my point is, if you're just starting from if you just are working on one piece, you're actually I think that's kind of what you're getting at, where it's like maybe you start from one piece and you do arrive at a local minimum for just that piece. But there's actually some point somewhere else on the curve where you can achieve a much deeper minimum. It's kind of confusing here because like in this case, minimum is good, but but you're minimizing the badness of your piece of pottery. But
I think that's like a super good analogy. I had a manager, one of my favorite managers of my life, who used to tell me that he's known engineers who got the same 1 year of experience 10 times. And then he's known other engineers who got 10 years of experience. And I think what he was referring to is, some engineers, they find a thing that they're comfortable with, and they find kind of this kind of slice of either like a language or like a way of doing things, or, maybe it's a platform that they're pretty comfortable with, and they just do that. Every year they're churning out new features, and that's great. Obviously, I mean, need people that can do that. But then there's other people who like, go deep, push themselves in weird directions, and always challenging themselves. And I think that's what he was referring to, is kind of like in your career you can find these local maxima, and you can just hang out there. And there's nothing wrong with that. Also, that's one thing I want to be clear about. But then other people kind of push themselves outside of those local maxima. Maybe like they do worse for a while in their career because they're being experimental. But
exactly.
But ultimately, it makes them a better person. I think that would be his theory, and that's also mine. I mean, that's something I believe in. I think people who are constantly challenging themselves just wind up as this more well-rounded individual and can see things from a higher level, see the bigger picture a lot better. And I don't know, I really took that to heart. I mean, he told me that when I was like 22 or something, and I've remembered it ever since.
Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
But so to tie this back to this chapter, he is describing something that has become kind of common understanding in software engineering, which is this idea of rapid iteration. And so now our goal is, well, yeah, so to take a step back with this chapter, the whole point of this goal is to say, okay, we have an idea. Like that was the whole point of our exercise in brainstorming, right? So we have the idea, but now we need to determine like, well, there's a whole series of questions that we need to ask ourselves about our idea, which is like, is it any fun? Like,
Yeah.
Can we build it? Like all these different questions, and the solution to answering those questions is these rapid iterations.
Right. Yeah. And he brings up this notion of the 8 filters, which I found super interesting. Where it's kind of a way of like validating your game, and you touched on a couple of them, like play testing, for instance, is one of the filters where it's just kind of like have people play your game, and are they enjoying themselves? Like, are they figuring it out? Is there enough of a good user experience that they can kind of get the hang of the game? And he lists 8 of these things where if you can get through all 8 of these filters, then that's a strong signal that you may have a viable product on your hands. And I thought this was a good way of looking at it. Some of them are interesting, in my opinion. Like, one of them, for example, is innovation. And he asks the question, like, is this game novel enough? And I think if you do have a novel game, like, there's potential that you can, like, really hit the big time with it. Like, if you have a novel game that really resonates with people, like, you're going to sell a lot of copies. But I also think, like, you can have a game that really just cribs from like a lot of other games. I mean, you see this all the time. And if it's like a solid implementation with, relatively smooth UIs and good feel, you can have a pretty good game that may sell well. I mean, I feel like I've seen games that sell pretty well. They're like pretty derivative. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So it is interesting. I think if you can get through all 8 filters, it's like a very good signal that your stuff is really strong. But maybe some of these filters you can fail at and still
this
have
is
like
interesting.
decent...
So it almost sounds like you're saying that these are sufficient. All like if you get through all of these filters, you will have a game that succeeds.
That's kind of the way I took it, or at least it's a very strong signal that it will succeed. I mean, I think there's this kind of luck aspect to it where you can get everything right and still fail miserably. But if you really truly, and I think there's also another aspect where you can get all these wrong and still sell well for some weird reason. I think that's
right, exactly. Like it's sufficient, but not necessary.
Yeah.
So one of the things that came to mind. So just recently, I've been playing Harvest Moon: Friends of Mineral Town on the Game Boy Advance.
Nice.
Which is my new console of choice. I don't think I ever knew what the gameplay of Harvest Moon was like. I don't know. Are you familiar with it?
Oh, I am very familiar. Harvest Moon 64 was my jam. Stardew Valley, legit.
Well, this is the thing, Stardew Valley, right? It's like I'm playing Friends Mineral Town, and to be fair, I've never played Stardew Valley, but I've seen like snippets.
So good. Yeah.
But it's so similar. Like the
it's a ripoff.
Well, right, exactly. It's like this is a very polished and I think slightly more expansive, or maybe not slightly, or maybe like much more expansive implementation of Harvest Moon.
Yeah, and I think the creator of Stardew Valley would be very open about that. I don't think he has... He's actually a fascinating person. I want to say his name is like Barone or something. I can't remember his name, but there was a point where I got in a wiki hole about him, like completely solo developer. All the graphics,
so cool.
All the music, the whole entire experience of that game is him, which is amazing. I mean, for one person to just be able to pull off that whole entire thing is like... it's just like a monumental achievement that's hard to even quantify. And he just loved those Harvest Moon games and wanted to pay homage to them. And he made an amazing game. But to your point, like, I don't think it would count as like getting through the innovation filter, because it was very similar to Harvest Moon. But it's a useful rubric. I don't know if that's the right word, rubric, but I think it's a really useful, concept. But it's, there's obviously ways you can get around it and ways you can kind of miss some of them.
One pitfall I could see with this is the way he's laying it out. It seems like you might want to go through these linearly. And I almost think like this is a good segue for the next section. But it's like, if I were reading this as is, I would be like, all right, well, I got to find a game that fits artistic impulse. And then, fits demographic and fits, but I don't think that's his point. But I think the way he's just like, I think the metaphor kind of implies that, which maybe is one shortcoming.
I agree. I'm actually super glad you brought this up, because I was thinking about this at the time that I read this chapter, but I forgot to write this in my notes. Is I wish he had a like linear like filter system, because I think there is a way to like represent this linearly. Like the first step in a linear filter system might be that you get like these core mechanics that like feel good. You have like 3 or 4 kind of novel, maybe not novel, but just like good core mechanics. You can have the ugliest graphics of all time. Like the dude who made Braid, for instance, I think his name is Jonathan Blow. He has been super open about his like creative process. He's shared all these like early videos of his games, and they look like garbage, but you can tell he's like really honing the mechanics, and he's just using these like kind of placeholder graphics. So it'd be interesting to see the version of this chapter where it was really linear with the filters. And I don't know. I think it might be tricky because different, like an artist might approach something differently, and I'm sure different games have been approached differently. But it'd be interesting to see that.
It's interesting because filter 6 is engineering, so that's pretty late, right? We have 8 filters. And, engineering is 6, and the question is it technically possible to build this game? And it almost feels like Jonathan Blow was answering question 6 up front.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think he was. And I think he was answering question 8 up front as well.
Yes.
Because he is, you can tell that he's like very tight loop iterative process, get something out, play it, maybe he's just playing it himself for a while, but he has a good sense of like what feels good.
Okay, well, so you called it out, tight loop. Like, we'll go on to the next section, which is the part that I really love about this, and which I was like glowing about when we talked about chapter 7.
Yeah.
So he talks about the rule of the loop, which is the more times you test and improve your design, the better your game will be.
Absolutely.
And it's funny because I think anyone would agree with that. It's like, of course, like that's self-evident. But as we said before, what this actually entails is producing something that isn't good. Like producing an initial version that's terrible, actually, from objectively terrible from in a bunch of different lenses.
Absolutely, which is tough.
And
and this is where it gets into that being very counterintuitive to humans. Humans aren't built to solve these mega problems. Humans, like he talks about waterfall versus agile.
Yeah.
And humans are built for waterfall. Like we see a problem and we conceive of a solution and we try to fully flesh out what that solution looks like, and then we try to implement that solution. Humans do not have the instinctive ability to say like, oh, I'm just going to do tight loops on this solution. I need to build a bridge from Manhattan to Brooklyn. Like, I'm just going to build this stick bridge
first.
Build a
shitty bridge first.
Oh shit, a bunch of cars, fell in the river. Like, I'll build it stronger now. Like, I just don't think that innate sense exists in humans. And you can see it so often. Even in our industry, I see it so often where people fall back on that waterfall sense. Like even at Google, I see it. I do it myself where I'm like, oh, like here's a big problem. I'm going to write this big design. And it's like, that's not what I should do. I should really get in and like prototype. Like, yeah, obviously I need to write a design at some point to like communicate these ideas to people. But, you know, I need to learn more about the space. I need to get in as quickly as possible, read, you know, write code, you know, learn what the boundaries are. And I think it's just easy to fall back into that, you know, human, I want to call it a frailty. Like we are not built for mega problems. I've used the analogy of a war, which I kind of like, even though it has like violent connotations. But like, you know, in war, you have to open up fronts. You know, like you might not have complete intel. You don't know what your enemy's doing. You know, like let's say you're fighting a war with Russia. You don't know what's going on in Moscow, right? Like, because the Kremlin's pretty like buttoned up. But you can open a front, you know, maybe in Ukraine or something, and you can gain intel. You can, as your front grows, you can send spies in there, and you can learn a little bit more about what's going on deeper inside your problem. And
dude, you're leaking all of the intel to the Russians.
Yeah, oops. Hopefully Putin's not listening. But yeah, I like that analogy because there's all these you know, like fog of war is like a term, and I think that same thing exists in these mega problems where people, you know, if you present people with a mega problem, they'll be like, oh, well, how are you going to solve this thing? And I think sometimes it's okay to just be like, I have no idea. Like, I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. Like, there's fog of war there. I can't see it. I need to, you know, do a little prototyping, or I need to start building the solution, and then I'll be able to see that.
Yeah. No, I think that is a really good point. And I wanted to go back to a point that you made earlier, which is like the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah.
It's like, presumably before they built the Brooklyn Bridge, they did a series of prototypes to validate these ideas.
Hopefully.
And also, hopefully. Also, presumably the people building the bridge, this wasn't the first bridge that they built. So they're able to like leverage those smaller projects to solve this problem.
Right. Yeah,
I guess what I wonder is like...
There's actually like a fascinating documentary about the dude who built the bridge. There's also a bunch of stuff in Manhattan named after the dude. It's a fascinating story because he died. He died of like the bends or something while building the bridge.
Driving?
Yeah, like I guess they were, you know, I can't remember how he died. Maybe he just like died of some other natural cause or something, but it was during the bridge's construction. But anyhow, slight tangent.
Yeah, no worries. But it's interesting to me because you don't see, I feel like you don't see software engineering projects like the Brooklyn Bridge and I don't know if like going to the moon is like a good example of a software engineering project like building the Brooklyn Bridge. Maybe?
I think that's actually a great example. Like I think going to the moon, I'm amazed that they don't have like, well, actually I'm sure they do have courses in college like about that whole thing.
Yeah.
But I feel like that should be more of a required thing because talk about like launching a product that just needs to work in the wild. Yeah. Like, have you ever launched a product where you couldn't like fairly easily fix bugs like after release? Like,
well, right. That's exactly my point. It's like, it just doesn't happen. And maybe that's why people don't design software that way because like you just, I mean, and everything's just dialing that dial to 11 in terms of you make a change, you can push a new version of it in the same day, you know, as opposed to like you launch the rocket, it's up there. You're not updating any of the software.
Yeah. We will never be as impressive as the people who wrote that software. Like, just imagine the pressure of like writing software that just legit cannot fail in any way.
Yeah.
And also writing it on like probably really crappy technology like punch cards.
This is always the joke is like the Raspberry Pi has more computing power and memory than the rocket that went to the moon. So and it's like, imagine, yeah, I cannot imagine. But this is also what I was thinking about this morning is when they were designing the original Pokemon games, like in order to store all of the graphical assets for the Pokemon game, they needed to come up with this crazy homegrown, custom to the way that they were drawing the graphics compression scheme, so that like they could fit it all in memory. And they were like splitting the image into 2 different like bit depth layers and recombining them in the graphics buffer. And like it's really clever, and I have a bunch of respect for the programmers who did it. And I think it's fantastic that programmers today don't need to solve those problems because they can spend their time doing something else.
Yeah, exactly. Like in the, he mentioned, or you mentioned the fast loop, and he's talking about how important a fast loop is, and I immediately thought of Flutter, where Flutter has hot reload. You are typing code, you hit the save key, Control S, and your simulator immediately updates with the new changes.
Stateful, like it doesn't even it's like it doesn't need to reset state or anything. That is pretty magical.
It is very magical, but it's also like it's just going to unlock so much productivity from like younger engineers. Like I can't even imagine what an engineer is going to be capable of accomplishing within like an hour in 10 years from now. Like it's already insane. Like you can jump into like Google Cloud Platform and string together like speech to text into like some kind of bigram analyzer that will produce like all the works of Shakespeare or something. And you can set that all up in like a few hours just by chaining together like random APIs. And it's just like, imagine what people are going to be able to do 10 years from now. It's going to be wild.
Do we have time to talk about prototyping and risk mitigation?
Let's do it. I also want to get to the passion thing that he brings up.
Yeah, where is the passion section?
Well, I honestly don't remember like in what context he mentioned this, but he mentioned something along the lines of like, a project will only be able to live as long as like the members of the team are like passionate about the project. And this is definitely something I've experienced where, I have an idea on Saturday morning and I like prototype up some crazy thing, for the idea. And then I like forget about it and never come back to it. And I think it's a good lesson that like keeping a project as short as possible so that like if people have this passion that kind of waxes and wanes, then I think it's good to keep things super tightly scoped so that you can kind of outlast the like duration of the project and make your passion last. Because this is just definitely something that's come up for me in the past.
That is a really hard problem because you tighten scope and everything becomes a lot more like the benefit becomes a lot more abstract, right? Because
and you become less passionate because it's less interesting.
Well, right,
now.
Exactly. It's like you're less inspired because you're like, oh yeah, like this class has better ergonomics.
Yeah, exactly.
Versus like the larger goal, which is like, everyone has this fantastic user experience, or
so you either need to like learn the slow burn passion, which I think is like probably the most amazing skill that great people have, is that they can just stick with something, even on the tough days, they just kind of stick with it. Or you need to learn kind of these hyper small projects, which some people do that. I think like Lucas Pope, who did, Papers, Please and Return of Obra Dinn and these little games, he spends a long time on them, but they're much smaller than like, a lot of other games. I think some people just learn the art of choosing small projects, and that's one way to make your passion last.
Yeah. And this is one thing that I want to say that I was just recently thinking about is like even the smallest game done end to end is an incredible amount of work.
Yeah.
It's like every time I come up with like, it's like such a simple, like there's one mechanic. It's so simple. Like I'll be able to turn this out in a weekend. It's like, no, like some people, the guy who made 2048 who just like tossed that out in a week or what have you, like,
right.
And that's a game, frankly, that lends itself to being incredibly small in scope. Luckily there's no level design to that. So And that's the trick.
Right.
That's what takes all the time, folks. It's like level design.
Yeah, don't make a game that has any of these like long tail efforts.
That's where the passion dries up, because
Yeah.
you're like, oh my gosh, now like I've coded up this game. It's really fun to play this one level, and now I need to design 100 levels of this game.
Right.
And it's like, that is the slog.
Totally.
That is. And
Yeah.
so, but this is like, we had that game Color Collapse, and it's, you know, it has an interesting little mechanic that took a certain amount of time to build. And it's like,
Yeah.
so much more of the time has been with like polish and creating content for the game, because you
Right.
need to design puzzles,
Designing levels.
and boards. I just want to have a quick note, because otherwise I feel like we're not going to have done this chapter justice about the loops and prototyping and risk mitigation. Just about how, like, and basically that's his point, right? It's like, when he's talking about tight loops, it means you're like working on a little prototype that answers a very specific question and
Right.
throws out every other consideration.
Yes. Yeah. Don't boil the ocean. You know, answer one question at a time, solve one problem at a time. This is a common mistake that people make.
And this kind of gets back to what I was saying earlier about the misleading idea about the filters. It's like, you can make a prototype for filter 8, you know, right off the bat. And he talks about this, so he kind of immediately dismisses that potential misconception. But it's like, maybe you have a jumping mechanic and you want to like see if that's fun. Yeah, just like build a little cube that has the similar mechanics.
Yeah, so such a valuable skill to be able to do that. Also a valuable skill to be able to see the jumping cube and extrapolate it out to like a final version. Because I actually think a lot of people see a jumping cube and they're just like, this looks like crap. Like, you know, this is never going to become anything. And I think being able to look at that jumping cube and make that leap of like, oh yeah, if we, you know, pick up, you know, put better graphics in here, obviously add some juicification, maybe the camera like, you know, kind of shakes a little bit when you land.
Yeah.
Being able to kind of see, see the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
Is such an important skill, especially in those early phases of prototyping.
This is actually a massive problem when you're showing your game to someone else, right? You show them, like, I think sometimes you can have this miscommunication between like what it's intended to demonstrate and like what your potential player is expecting.
Right.
I think there are certain prototypes you're never going to get them to understand what the point of the prototype is. Like, I'm testing out my game and you show it to them, and then exactly to your point, it's like, they're like, what the hell? Like, this is a cube. Like, why do I care? Like, I don't know. What's that cube's story? And it's like, it's not about the story yet. I'm just trying to jump. And it's like,
no, this happens with my wife all the time because I show people things way too early in the creative process. And my wife is always just like, what the hell is that? It looks like garbage.
I have definitely done that. And it's funny because it can take you a lot of time to produce this completely unimpressive thing.
Oh God.
And like, I remember one time I was like just working with like transparency for the first time in Blender. And like, I animated a transparent cube that had like index of reflection in front of another cube.
Oh wow.
And like, when I rendered that, I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. I'm so excited about this. And then like I showed it to someone else and they're like, I have no idea. You couldn't even tell what you were looking at. Like I could, because I could see the scene, but it's like, it's that classic example where it's like, you saw the effort that went into it.
Yeah.
And know the story. And that's why it's exciting to you.
I think this is part of the reason having kind of a simpatico team is really important. Because like I feed off of the enthusiasm of like the people around me. It can be very hard for me to kind of generate my own enthusiasm about things. And if you're working with people that understand like, hey, the game is in like kind of an early phase, we're prototyping, the graphics look like garbage, but there's a few promising mechanics in there and like everyone can get excited about those. I think it's really valuable to have that atmosphere. because that can just be totally demoralizing. Like showing someone from the outside world and they're just like, this is stupid. So it's good to have a team.
I think Jesse Schell would agree that like it's actually really important to have the right. And I don't know if he talks about this in this, but in the prototype section. But it's really important to understand who the target audience of the prototype is.
Yeah.
Because it's just as bad of an idea to show a much more polished preview to your internal team because it would take too long to produce, as it is a bad idea to show this like throwaway prototype to the external world.
Right.
And like understanding who the right target audience of this prototype is, that's crucial.
Yeah.
And I think it can be easy not to keep that in mind.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think maybe we can wrap this chapter up. Was there any other points in this chapter that you wanted to call out?
I don't think so. I thought this was a really cool chapter. I was really excited to read about something that I feel like I'm familiar with because in my career this has been a big concept. But he sort of brought up a couple new ideas that I haven't heard. So I was big fan of this one.
Okay, so I don't think we'll dedicate a whole episode to. Like we did with brainstorming. But I think what would be good for us to do is at the beginning of the next episode, this is homework for us. We're building if we want to build our game, what prototypes will we build for, like, what risks does our game have? Because this is a big thing he talks about that we didn't really touch on. It's like, what risks does our current idea have?
Yeah.
Like, let's enumerate those. Mm-hmm. And then what prototypes would we build that allows us to efficiently de-risk those things?
Love it.
I mean, I guess that's pretty much it. Like that's,
and then
that's
we build
the
them.
Exercise. Well, and then we build them, but that's not gonna. Well, who knows? Maybe we'll be really ambitious and we'll be able to build them before next time. But but yeah, at the very least, we'll have those risks enumerated, and we'll have what prototypes we want to build for those risks.
Love it. Yeah, sounds good. Let's do it.
And then just to also call out, so the next episode, our goal is to talk about chapters 9, 10, and 11, which is all about the player. So yeah, we'll see you there.
Excited to get there. Yeah, see you, Matt.